coming up in our newscast tonight. President Moon Jae-in appoints 3 new officials. The changes are aimed at ensuring efforts to improve the economy and create more jobs pick up speed. The Vice Transport Ministers of Seoul and Pyongyang meet for talks. Focal point of discussions, cooperation on connecting and modernizing railways running across the border. North Korea has remained silent, not setting a timeline on efforts to denuclearize. Washington's top diplomat provides reassurance that constant reassessment of Pyongyang's progress will be made. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. We start with the sudden reshuffle at the nation's top office, the first such move by President Moon Jae-in since his term began last May. Naturally, the replacement of his top aides for economic affairs and job creation is grabbing some extra attention. Arirang's chief Cheongwade correspondent Moon Geon-young has our top story.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in has replaced 3 of his key senior aides as the administration begins its second year in office and putting extra emphasis on household economics and job creation. The surprise announcement was made by the president's chief of staff Im Jong-seok Tuesday morning, only a day and a half after the South Korean leader's return from a 4-day state visit to Russia.
The president has appointed Presidential Secretary for Policy Planning Chung Tae-ho to Senior Presidential Secretary for Job Creation, and Yoon Jong-won, who currently serves as the South Korean ambassador to the OECD, to Senior Presidential Secretary for Economic Affairs. The president also named a new Senior Presidential Secretary for Civil Society, Lee Yong-sun, a district chief of the ruling Democratic Party, replacing the current Senior Secretary for Civic Reform.
Chung Tae-ho, who has also served as Secretary of State Affairs and Policy Coordination at the Office of the President during the Roh Moo-hyun administration, will step in to head job creation, while Yoon Jong-won, a former director from the Finance Ministry and currently permanent representative to the OECD, will replace Hong Jang-pyo as Chief Secretary for Economic Affairs. Lee Yong-sun, named to the post of Senior Presidential Secretary for Civil Society, used to head the policy planning team at the Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice. The presidential chief of staff explained Tuesday's reshuffle, the first of its kind since President Moon took office in May 2017, was largely aimed at further accelerating government efforts to reform the domestic economy and create jobs, both key economic objectives of the Moon administration. The shakeup of the president's top economic aides come as the administration's signature economic policy is starting to backfire a year into its term, with unemployment increasing despite its push to create new jobs and the income gap widening even more. Sources in the Blue House say the president decided he needed a shakeup when the May unemployment rate came up to an 18-year high and household income in the lowest quintile fell by a record 8% on year in the first 3 months of the year, even as it rose for high earners.
The past year has been a period of setting the policy direction of the Moon Jae-in government, which is income-led, innovation-led growth, and fair economy. I hope you understand the reshuffle as the president's determination to create actual results that the people can feel by stepping on the accelerator in the second year.
Moon Geon-young, Arirang News, The Blue House.
During the briefing, the presidential chief of staff explained the reasons behind appointing the new presidential staff. Quite simply, they are the ideal candidates to help shift into higher gear in terms of efforts to improve the economy and create more jobs. For details, let's turn to our Hwang Ho-jun.
Chung Tae-ho's appointment as the new Senior Secretary for Job Creation should not come as a surprise, said the presidential chief of staff, pointing to his expertise in political affairs as well as his experience as the Moon administration's first presidential secretary for policy planning.
Chung Tae-ho's appointment reflects the administration's determination to direct his energy to speeding up job creation.
Im Jong-seok said the top office was impressed by Chong's role as point man for the so-called Gwangju model jobs. That's a new joint effort by Hyundai Motor and Gwangju to build a car factory that would create more jobs in the city by cutting pay nearly in half, but increasing real disposable income through more benefits from the city, like housing, medical care, and education. The new senior presidential secretary for economic affairs is Yoon Jong-won. Im said Yoon played a critical role as chief of the South Korean mission to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is because the economic paradigm sought by the OECD, he said, is in sync with that of President Moon's. And he said Yoon is recognized as one of the most respected economic policy experts at home and abroad.
With a deep understanding of macroeconomics and the real economy, and a deep understanding of this administration's economic policy and philosophy, we expect Yoon Jong-won's appointment will give a fresh impetus to the economy as a whole.
Lee Yong-sun, meanwhile, is not only replacing the current Chief of Staff for Social Innovation, but getting a new title, the Presidential Senior Secretary for Civil Society. Im noted Lee's experience in various civic movements, labor movements, unification movements, and institutional politics.
During the past year, we focused on coming up with innovative projects via the Social Innovation Office. And now, with Lee's appointment, and the office reorganized to focus on civil social affairs, we see the administration's willingness to interact and collaborate more organically with society at large.
The Blue House denied claims from some observers that the reshuffle of senior secretaries was a punitive measure in response to recent data showing unequal income distribution and weak job figures. A high-ranking Blue House official emphasized that appointing new presidential staff is meant purely to accelerate and realize the government's efforts to achieve a sustainable and people-centered economy. Hwang Sok-yong, Arirang News.
Keeping our sights fixed at Cheongwade, President Moon took time to emphasize the importance of remembering the Korean War. Cha Sang-mi shares with us his message of gratitude to those who gave their lives during the conflict, as well as those who serve the nation today.
In remembrance of the sacrifices made during the Korean War, President Moon Jae-in wrote, quote, "Peace is the genuine way to pay respect to the nation's veterans and fallen heroes." President Moon uploaded these messages onto his Twitter account as his initial plan to attend a ceremony at the United Nations Memorial Cemetery in Busan was canceled due to bad weather. He wrote there are no borders when it comes to repaying the devotion and sacrifices made for Korea, and the way to wholly repay this courage is to make the Korean peninsula into a peaceful peninsula without war. President Moon also brought up the promises made at the historic Panmunjom summit in April and the recent shift towards peace. He called the North Korea-US summit a success and said the South Korean government will do whatever it can to assist in recovery and repatriation of the remains of the prisoners of war and soldiers declared missing in action during the Korean War. He praised the young men from 21 different nations who opened up a world map to find Korea 68 years ago and sacrificed their lives for strangers. President Moon also gave credit to the Korean troops in the United Nations peacekeeping forces abroad, working in Somalia, Angola, Haiti, and other places around the world. He said South Korea hasn't forgotten the friendship it received and is trying to repay that friendship by helping in the efforts towards peace for all mankind. As most of the Korean War veterans are over 80 years old, Moon pledged to do what he can so the remaining veterans can visit Korea before too much time passes. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Representatives of the two Koreas are sitting down for another round of discussions today. This time, it's about cooperation on linking up railroads. Let's connect to our Unification Ministry correspondent Oh Jung-hee, who's on the line. Jung-hee, are the talks still ongoing? It seems like we're seeing the longest one so far.
Daniel, it's a long day for the delegations of Seoul and Pyongyang. Today's talks on connecting and modernizing the railways between the two Koreas kicked off at 10 a.m. Korea time at the border village of Panmunjom. 10 hours have passed, and what we're hearing right now is that the delegations have just gotten into the closing session after going through 3 rounds of 2+2 meetings throughout the day. They did exchange the draft agreements early this afternoon, but it seems it took quite a bit of time for the two sides to fine-tune the details of that. Well, so much so as says this is the first time that the two Koreas have discussed railways since 2008. Just to give you a recap, the two Koreas connected one railway in 2004 between the South Korean capital Seoul and North Korean city of Sinuiju, but renovation is needed to modernize it. In addition to that one, South and North Korea are hoping to connect the railways along the eastern coast of the peninsula, which would start off in South Korea's southeastern city of Busan, cut through North Korea, and even go into Russia and head towards Europe. But it's difficult for us to expect that they can do what is necessary to actually connect and upgrade the railways because of the international sanctions on North Korea. So for now, Seoul and Pyongyang are expected to agree to investigate the current status of the rail network and conduct joint studies on how to modernize it. Daniel.
All right, Chung-Yi, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. It's already been a half a month since the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. met for an historic summit. The world is curious to learn if any progress has been made on steps to denuclearize Pyongyang, which is why Washington's top diplomat responded. However, according to our EG1, there was a difference in tone compared to his previous statement.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says there's no timeline for North Korea's denuclearization, but the Trump administration will constantly reassess whether enough progress is being made to continue talks. Pompeo made the remarks in a phone interview with CNN to mark his first 2 months in office. While there will be no timeline on the denuclearization process, Pompeo said the U.S. is committed to going forward at an expeditious moment to achieve what was agreed at the first ever North Korea-U.S. summit on June 12th. This is in stark contrast to a senior U.S. defense official who said ahead of Defense Secretary James Mattis' trip to Asia that Washington will soon set a timeline for North Korea with specific asks. Pompeo had also told reporters the day after the Singapore summit that Washington hopes to achieve North Korea's major disarmament within Trump's current term, which ends in January 2021. But as if to reconfirm, Pentagon spokeswoman Dana White said Monday that U.S. defense officials would only speak to military-related negotiations on North Korea and that there was no specific timeline for the diplomatic process. Despite concerns about the root of these comments and what could be causing the delay with the follow-up meetings, Pompeo remained outwardly optimistic about North Korea's denuclearization. Pompeo suggested it was too soon to expect a detailed roadmap after 40 years of tensions, but he insisted North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had been unequivocal about his willingness to denuclearize. Pompeo added that understandings put together prior to and during the summit put the U.S. on the right trajectory to build a framework for success. Referring to President Trump's suspension of Washington's joint military exercises with South Korea, Pompeo said it would only last if there's a good faith negotiation progress with productive results being achieved. While Pompeo said a week ago that he would likely travel back to Pyongyang before too terribly long, there has not yet been an official announcement on his travel plans. 이지원, Arirang News.
One of the key subjects that still needs to be addressed when it comes to North Korea is medical assistance. According to a foundation that works closely with the regime, in terms of humanitarian aid, currently tuberculosis is a more serious issue than malnutrition. Here's Park Hee-jun with a closer look into the situation.
One thing North Korea needs desperately, but which has received too little attention, is medical assistance. The Eugene Bell Foundation has been working with Pyongyang since the 1990s to fulfill the humanitarian needs of the North Korean people. The foundation aims to eradicate tuberculosis, which has become resistant to drugs, a dire issue that requires international attention.
Tuberculosis is North Korea's number 1, 2, and 3 biggest health challenge. I think it far outstrips any other disease and arguably even concerns for malnutrition because it's an airborne infection. And it can go dormant and become active decades after someone actually contracts it.
An estimated 8,000 North Koreans contract multi-drug-resistant TB every year. The foundation has been treating about 15% of them, and the Global Fund 5%, which leaves some 80% unaccounted for. But at present, there's not much that can be done. Global organizations have had to pull out of North Korea amid tensions on the Korean peninsula and enforcement of international sanctions.
The latest sanctions, for instance, prohibits metal And a lot of states have interpreted that to mean anything that contains metal. So that the latest sanctions have thrown the a whole series of normal, regular humanitarian-related items into question. And some organizations are just not willing to take that risk.
If tuberculosis isn't treated, it will only spread. Regardless of the obstacles that now exist, Dr. Linton believes that humanitarian problems like TB should not be sidelined by politics.
If they have a serious, life-threatening humanitarian issue that you can deal with in a transparent manner, making your treatment of that particular problem subject to some sort of political consideration on their part, I think is out of line. So there should be a dual-track system where basic humanitarian needs are met with regardless of the political or military tensions.
And according to Dr. Linton, North Koreans are very determined to go ahead. He says humanitarian assistance is likely to bring great benefits to them, much more than the easing or lifting of economic sanctions. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
The nation's consumer sentiment index plummets to its lowest point since last April. Key contributing factor includes gloomy job figures and trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Go Ryuni breaks down the discouraging digits for us.
South Korea's consumer confidence dipped in June to its lowest point in 14 months. According to the Bank of Korea, the composite sentiment index dropped 2.4 points from the previous month to 105.5. Its lowest level since April 2017. A reading above 100 means there are more optimists than pessimists about the economy. The nation's central bank attributed the fall to two main concerns for South Koreans: sluggish job figures and the U.S.-China trade spat. Earlier this month, Statistics Korea announced that the unemployment rate for Koreans aged 15 to 29 was 10.5%. The highest on record since related figures were first compiled in 1999. South Koreans were also pessimistic about the nation's economy because of increasing tensions between the U.S. and China. U.S. President Donald Trump announced earlier in June that he will press ahead with a 25% tariff on Chinese imports, and China's Commerce Ministry said it would apply countermeasures of the same scale. The Bank of Korea said South Koreans were worried about the damage to the nation's exporters, which produce parts that go into China's final products. It also added that other external factors might have affected people's sentiment, such as U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates.
South Korean stocks dropped in June. This is related to another rate hike by the U.S. Fed. Other emerging economies such as Turkey or Brazil have been seeing capital outflows after the move.
The Bank of Korea predicted that next month's consumer sentiment index will likely be affected by what happens to the nation's exports. Go Ryuni, Arirang News.
Staying here in the nation, a revised law passed in February requires companies with 300 or more employees to reduce maximum weekly working hours to 52 from the current 68. But some raise concerns over the possible side effects. To ensure a smooth transition and a soft landing, the government has devised some special measures. Won Jung-hwan explains how they would work.
The government will implement certain measures to cushion firms from the impact of the new shorter working hours, which come into effect next month. Minister of Strategy and Finance Kim Dong-yeon said on Tuesday that the government will focus on managing a soft landing for the revised 52-hour maximum working week, so that it reflects the needs of certain sectors. Kim said the maximum working hours will be implemented in stages to try to cushion businesses from any negative impact, especially in the manufacturing and construction sectors and certain parts of the retail sector. He also said that the government will allow special overtime working hours for ICT companies that manage key infrastructure such as server control and hacking prevention. Employees at these firms will be able to work an additional 12 hours a week. The shorter maximum working hours, one of President Moon Jae-in's main election pledges, is aimed at improving the work-life balance and reducing what are often called inhumanely long working hours. But some market watchers say, while the reduced working hours will benefit many people, others could suffer detrimental effects. Some labor groups are against the new system as it cuts the salaries of employees at smaller companies, and employers are opposed as shortened work hours tend to increase labor costs. The government needs to closely cooperate with workers and employers to mitigate any adverse effects of the policy. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
The government and ruling party held talks on policies linked to research and development amid rapid technological changes on the heels of the fourth industrial revolution. Noting the country's current R&D system has reached its limit, both sides agreed to step up innovation that can help create new industries and new jobs. Kim Min-ji sheds light on what was produced through that meeting.
South Korea plans to put greater emphasis on research and development in the coming years as part of efforts to foster new growth engines and create new jobs. The agreement was reached Tuesday during a policy coordination meeting between the government and the ruling Democratic Party of Korea.
We are now in an era where our country's competitiveness is determined by the speed at which innovations in science and technology lead to the creation of new industries and new growth engines. In order to meet the fast-changing trends of the fourth industrial revolution and changes in society, we must step up innovation across all areas.
For starters, the country plans to double the funding for basic science research to some $2.2 billion by 2022. This will be used to support innovative projects initiated by researchers and is aimed at encouraging creative research and development. The two sides also agreed to increase the budget for R&D to tackle environmental issues, such as fine dust pollution, to some $1 billion. And the government plans to revive a ministerial-level meeting on science and technology so that related ministries can step up coordination and work hand in hand. This is all part of President Moon Jae-in's goal of achieving innovative growth, by which technological innovation leads to economic growth and job creation.
This will be the basic blueprint for innovative R&D under the Moon Jae-in government over the next 5 years. Through enhanced innovation, we will achieve innovative growth, create new jobs, and improve people's lives.
The ruling party also vowed to do its part to amend relevant laws and increase the budget to ensure the smooth implementation of the policies and measures. The government will unveil a comprehensive plan on the matter in mid-July. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea can lay claim to another world's first global aging center, a facility dedicated to promoting the human rights of the elderly. With an increasing number of aging societies around the world, the Asia-Europe Meeting and Intergovernmental Dialogue Forum decided to protect senior citizens from discrimination and poverty. Korea assumed the initiative, establishing the center in the nation's capital.
Our center will primarily provide a forum on elderly rights. We will further develop policies and facilitate international cooperation to advance their rights. South Korea is devoted to making meaningful contributions to advancing elderly human rights.
The chair of Korea's National Human Rights Commission, as well as Park Won-soon, the mayor of Seoul, also took part in the opening ceremony. Over in France, a South Korean novelist is awarded the Emile Guimet Prize for Asian literature. The Guimet Museum of Asian Art announced Hwang Sok-yong earned the recognition on Monday, local time, for his novel At Dusk. The prize was inaugurated for the first time last year to honor the works of Asian authors published in French. Hwang's book portrays contrasting lives of a successful architect in his 60s and a young theater producer who barely make ends meet, both looking back at their lives at dusk. 5 other Asian authors, including novelists from India and China, were also shortlisted. Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, we got quite a downpour today. How much more precipitation are we expecting?
Well, Daniel, it's still raining over the central region, but the rain is expected to dissipate early in the morning tomorrow. By then, the monsoon front will make its way to the southern regions. Until tomorrow, the southwest will get the most amount of precipitation. The Chungcheong provinces will receive up to 100 millimeters. The daily low in Seoul will remain at 20 degrees Celsius. Daegu and Gyeongju are warmer at 24 and 23 degrees respectively. As Seoul brightens up, the mercury will peak up to 28 degrees. Gwangju hits 27 and Busan is a bit lower at 25 degrees. The monsoon front will move up and down the peninsula even until next week, bringing outbreaks of heavy rain. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we could squeeze into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for staying with us.